My journey of faith could be summed up in one word: gratitude. I didn't have a particularly traumatic childhood, given that I grew up as a white boy in apartheid South Africa. There were certainly many of my contemporaries who were far worse off than I was. Nevertheless, my parents' divorce, the ensuing upheaval of moving every few years, and having a succession of questionable father figures passing in and out of my life, left me damaged in ways that could easily have led to delinquency or worse. It's not that I ever felt sorry for myself, however. What I did feel, though, was guilt. I was sufficiently aware of my failings to believe that all I was experiencing was my fault, my just desserts for not being good enough. The way out for me was to be a good boy, to work hard enough at school and to achieve enough to earn the love and acceptance I felt I was lacking. It was in the message of Jesus that I found relief from that guilt, and in his church that I found acceptance. And all of this as a free gift, not as the reward for hard work, but as the wonderful mystery of grace. God freely and graciously offering me a home in his heart. My response of faith, then, was one of pure gratitude. Because this was my experience, I guess I just assumed everyone else was the same. Jesus had the power to reach into our broken lives and make us whole. And in response, we would worship and serve him. And for the most part, that was exactly what I encountered among the rest of the kids who would hang out at our church youth group on a Friday night. Like me, they each had their own unique story of brokenness. We gathered in the place where we found healing together. When I started my first job as a trainee accountant in a printing firm in Cape Town, I found my colleagues there were also broken people. There were some who, like me, had found solace in faith, and as for the others, well, it was easy for me to see how an encounter with Jesus would save them, all of them, just as it had saved me. All, that is, except for one guy called Johan. Like me, Johan was a young trainee manager. Unlike me, he seemed to have his life together in every way imaginable. He wasn't just young. Johan was fit, handsome, energetic, driven, upwardly mobile. He had a flat in a swanky part of Cape Town overlooking the Atlantic. He was a triathlete, and every morning he would swim 50 lengths of the Sea Point swimming pool, go for a run around his neighborhood, and then cycle the 15 miles to work. He had the health, he had the body, he had the car, he had the girls, the money, and the swagger. And I couldn't help wondering to myself, what on earth does Jesus have to offer him? Johan was the first person who really made me wonder whether it was possible to have a Christian faith based on something other than gratitude. At that stage, I didn't have the theological language to articulate the thought. I just knew that talking to this guy about needing Jesus would be futile, especially when I couldn't see anything he might need Jesus for. Well, I've had a few years of theological reflection and pastoral experience since then. I'm not sure I have an answer, but let me tell you what I have learned so far about faith and gratitude. I'll do so under the themes of what I've learned biblically, theologically, and pastorally. Well, from a biblical perspective, it seems that faith in God is definitely linked to gratitude. The pattern that is repeated throughout both the Old and New Testaments, and which is evident in the two readings today, is as follows. There is a situation of peril, or suffering, or sin, or danger. Then God offers deliverance or redemption, salvation or rescue as a pure act of grace and by his mighty hand. And then the people respond in thanksgiving, in worship and obedient service. Our first reading recounts the people of Israel reaching Mount Sinai 3 months after God has liberated them from the slavery under Pharaoh in Egypt. They are reminded of how God bore them on eagle's wings to freedom, and then they are given their calling to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. I believe it's significant that in the yearly celebration of the Passover, this story of liberation is retold to the children again and again and again, so that Jewish children grow up with a strong self-identity as the nation who were rescued by God from slavery. In our Gospel reading, we again encounter a commissioning text. This time, it is Jesus' disciples being commissioned to proclaim the kingdom of heaven is at hand, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. And why should they do this? Because, says Jesus, you received without paying, give without pay. Or, as we used to sing as children, freely, freely you have received, freely, freely give. It isn't made clear to the reader at this point what exactly each disciple has received, but we're left to assume that they knew. Certainly these words from Jesus were enough to send them on their way, and in the long run, enough for all of them, except Judas Iscariot, to remain true to their faith in Jesus, even to the point of death. Now, theologically speaking, there is, of course, another way that religion could work, and that is the other way round. Instead of being thankful for what you have received from God, you might rather do things for God in the hope of what you may yet receive. In other words, if you obey Him enough, if you believe in Him enough, if you do enough good things, then God could be persuaded to give you what you want. The Bible does indeed recognize this form of religion, but rejects it as being not just false Christianity, but in fact anti-Christian. And here's why. Such faith puts us at the center and makes God our servant. We call the shots. But if we had such power over God, why would we need God in the first place? Why not simply cut out the middleman and save ourselves? A God over whom we have such power is a God too weak to save us. And that is why throughout the Church's history, such a religion of salvation by works has been rejected time and again. It seems then that obedience flowing out of gratitude is the way Christian faith works. So where does that leave people like my friend Johann? Is there any good news for someone who doesn't need God? Well, I have to say, in theory, no. And why should there be? Why would such a person want good news anyway? In theory. I've reflected on this question biblically and theologically. Let me finish by making a comment about what I've learned pastorally. You see, from a pastoral perspective, I'm not sure how many Johanns there actually are out there. Our paths diverged, so I never got to know his whole story. Yet over the years, I have encountered many other folk who, to the outside world, fit a very similar mold. Successful, got it together, fit, healthy, beautiful, comfortably wealthy men and women who would leave anybody else wondering what on earth could Jesus ever offer them. And if you're wondering where I've encountered them, it's been in the counseling room as they've poured out their broken hearts in pain. And so, to my surprise, but I really shouldn't be surprised any longer, it turns out even the best among us are broken. In the end, though, this is not a sermon about the best among us. It's a sermon about you and me. Do you feel you have no reason for gratitude? Then hear the good news. Jesus is still abroad in this world through his Spirit and in his church to heal the sick, to raise the dead, to cleanse the leper, and cast out demons. He has not forsaken you. Do you have reason for gratitude? Then let your gratitude move you to follow Jesus. Freely, freely you have received. Freely, freely give.